This video will summarize some of the things I've learned in producing the previous 3 videos on producing these book-matched panels for the backs and sides of guitars, which were sliced on the bandsaw using the Accu-Slice system. In addition, I'll be describing other techniques I've learned over the years in producing other projects with the Accu-Slice system. This video will be useful to any of our customers who use the Accu-Slice system on the bandsaw for producing guitar backs, but also useful to any of your other customers who use Accu-Slice system for producing wider and longer boards. Each time I start a new project, I strive to develop new techniques and new ideas to improve on projects I've done in the past. I'm always looking for a better way to do things. Sometimes these new ideas may work, other times they may not, and I have to revert back to my original ideas, but I'm willing to give it a try. This video summarizes the results of what I learned and also describes some important techniques that you need to follow to give you the optimum results from your Accu-Slice system. Here's a list of lessons learned during the production of the previous 3 videos, as well as other helpful tips to get the optimum performance from the Accu-Slice system. Each of these listed items will be discussed and demonstrated in this video. There are a number of methods of attaching the boards to be sliced to the sacrificial fence, as described in part 1 of this 3-part video series. If you've seen some of my early videos, you've seen I use double-sided tape to attach the board to the sacrificial fence. This is what we call X-Fasten tape. You buy it on Amazon. We tested around a dozen tapes in a study we did previously, and the tapes we tested, this is the best tape for holding boards to the sacrificial fence. And it works great for doing small boards, and even round small discs I've done with this technique. However, if you do longer boards, some problems occur. With long boards, the board may not be perfectly flat, may have a bow or twist in it, and then you start cutting it. It relieves some stress in the board, some additional movement in the wood occurs, and as a result the board breaks away from the double-sided tape and you get inaccurate cuts. So I prefer not to use double-sided tape for long boards. It works great for small boards, but not for long boards. The other disadvantage of the tape is you've got to be careful you don't cut into the double-sided tape with your bandsaw blade. You cut into tape, it comes up your blade and you have a messed up blade. So for doing long boards, my preference is to glue the board directly to the piece of MDF. And if you've seen some other videos on doing some of the other projects I've done, I've used this technique a lot. And the advantage of it is the board does not move. Once it's attached to that fence with usually Type-On glue or even CA glue, it stays permanently on there. You can cut your boards, cut your pieces off. The board doesn't move, and I cut all the way down right to the MDF board. Here I'm demonstrating the warping of the thin board as it is being sliced off the main board. The sliced board is warping due to heat being generated in cutting and also due to stress being relieved in the board. By gluing the board being cut to the sacrificial fence, accurate thin boards can still be cut even though the thin board is warping. So that technique works pretty good. The other technique I've used, I've created some custom fences. This is a fence made again from MDF with some offset cam clamps. And this is just a system for doing a quick release clamping a board. And this works nice if you just have a board you want to cut 1 or 2 slices off, but not cut the whole board down, and you don't want to glue it to a piece of MDF. The disadvantage of this system is you have a 1/4 inch here you can't cut down to. So if I wanted to cut this whole board the whole way down, this is not the preferable way to cut the board down. I prefer actually to glue it to an MDF sheet. In video 1, I tried gluing thin wood strips, each 1/100,000 of an inch thick, to the sacrificial fence, and then gluing the board to be sliced to these thin wood strips using Type-On glue. My hope was that this would better enable you to cut 100% of the board down to these thin wood strips without cutting into the MDF sacrificial fence. It seemed like a good idea, but it was probably not worth the effort, so in the future I will revert back to gluing the boards directly to the sacrificial fence. One other thing to keep in mind when you're slicing boards on the Accu-Slice system is you always want your board totally supported by a piece of MDF. You don't want the board overhanging the MDF. If the board overhangs the MDF, it may work fine for the first couple cuts, but with time as that board gets thinner, you'll start getting movement and vibration of the wood. And as that wood gets thinner, vibration, then you get inaccurate cuts. So it's always a preference to totally support your board with this piece of MDF. This is the case here where I have a piece of Purple Heart is about 9 inches by 14 inches. My sacrificial fence is the same size as that board, so it'll be totally supportive the entire cutting process. And I cut the whole way down to the very end of that board. In order to get the smoothest cut surfaces using the Accu-Slice system on your bandsaw, any source of vibration should be minimized. This is why we added the Mag-G clamps to the Accu-Slice system, to reduce the vibration of the index table. Another way to reduce vibration is to allow both the sacrificial fence and the board being cut to ride flat and smoothly on the top of the bandsaw table, with no binding of the board as it passes through the bandsaw blade. This does appear to give you smoother cuts. Also, since the sacrificial fence rides on the bandsaw table, it acts like a dust barrier to help prevent sawdust from getting into the rail channel or the roller bearings on the carriage. This means that you need to glue the board to the bottom edge of the sacrificial fence, and after the glue dries, straighten this bottom edge on a planer or sander so that both will be flush and lay flat on the bandsaw table. Then the board and sacrificial fence are clamped to the carriage before it is attached to the carriage with screws. Make sure the board and sacrificial fence do not bind as you push them along the bandsaw table. I then pre-drill all 10 holes for the screws and attach a sacrificial fence to the carriage using the 3/4 inch wood screws. The clamps are then removed and the carriage movement is checked to assure that the board slides with no binding or restriction. I do prefer this method over the spacer shown in video 1. This does reduce vibration and gives you smoother cuts. On my bandsaw, I've mounted the model AS266 Accu-Slice index table, which is our largest model of the Accu-Slice index table. We also have 2 other models. This is the model AS173, which is our smallest Accu-Slice index table, and it's about 8 inches shorter in length than this larger table. And then we have another model, the AS216, which is about 4 inches longer than this. The advantage of having a larger table is it gives you more support for the rail. And the more support you have for the rail, the less vibration you're going to have out in the ends of the rail. So going to a larger table is preferable. The disadvantage of larger tables are more expensive. But you also can eliminate some of this by putting supports underneath your rail in the ends, and that'll give you similar results. But for cutting longer boards, my preference is to use a slightly larger table. The more support you give to a rail, the less vibration, and therefore the smoother the cuts. I normally use 1/2 inch wide blades for board ripping and resawing because the kerf of these blades is only 45/1000 of an inch thick, whereas the wider blades and carbide tooth blades have a wider kerf and therefore waste more wood. The number of teeth per inch of the blades for resawing is dependent on the thickness of the boards you will be cutting. It's always a compromise between the smoothness of the cut and the gumming up of the bandsaw blade. The more teeth per inch, the smoother the cut, but also the faster the blade gums up. When slicing boards less than 2 inches thick, I use 1/2 inch wide blades and 10 teeth per inch. When slicing boards from 3 inches to 6 inches thick, I recommend 8 teeth per inch blades. When I sliced some of the boards that were 5 inches thick in the second video using the 10 teeth per inch blades, I started to get some gum up on the bandsaw blade. It was not too bad, but it was fairly easy to clean up on the bandsaw blade by just wiping it down with some WD-40. When I switched to the 8 teeth per inch blades, the gumming up of the bandsaw blade went away, even after slicing some padauk wood. However, when using this coarser blade, the surface of the boards were not quite as smooth as when I used the 10 teeth per inch blade. For slicing boards from 6 inches to 10 inches thick, I recommend using 6 teeth per inch blades. In video 3, I used a 6 teeth per inch blade for slicing all of the 5 1/4 inch wide by 22 inch long boards. I did not experience any gumming up of the bandsaw blades. However, after cutting the maple, mahogany, and cherry boards, I started to see some minor smoke, which normally indicates that the bandsaw blade is getting dull. So I did replace the bandsaw blade with a new blade before cutting the Wengi board. For any boards over 10 inches thick, I would recommend using 4 teeth per inch blades. Always use sharp bandsaw blades. A dull blade will give you poor results. You can usually tell when a blade is getting dull because you will start seeing smoke being generated when slicing, and you'll start seeing shadowing or dark marks on the surface of the cut boards. Always use sharp blades for the best results. I added a support to the end of the rail to prevent the rail from sagging. This also helps reduce vibration and oscillation on the end of the board and will give you a smoother cut. The use of these rail supports was described in a previous video on slicing long boards on the Accu-Slice system. I have produced numerous videos in which I have shown that by slicing or cutting slowly with the Accu-Slice system, you get smoother and better cuts. Basically, the slower you cut, the smoother the cut surface on the sliced board. By slicing slowly, the bandsaw blade acts like a planer, smoothing the surface of the cut. By slicing slowly, you allow more time for the sawdust to exit the teeth of the bandsaw blade, and this reduces the chance of the blade gumming up. Also, by slicing slowly, you can use a finer tooth bandsaw blade, which again will give you even a smoother cut. Here's the finished surface of that maple board just cut. This is a 5-inch wide board cut with a 10 teeth per inch blade. The AccuPath laser system mounts on the top wheel housing on the bandsaw, just above the top blade guide. It projects a red laser line down the teeth of the bandsaw blade and projects a red laser line for the path that the bandsaw blade will be cutting. This serves two purposes. First, it shows you exactly where you will be cutting and is helpful in setting up your cuts for your projects. Secondly, it's a safety device. Whenever you see the red line, you want to make sure your hands and fingers are out of the path of the bandsaw blade. After cutting all the boards, I ran them through a board sander to determine exactly how much wood needs to be sanded off the surface to remove all the bandsaw blade marks and give you a perfectly finished surface. After testing this on multiple boards in different wood species, I confirmed that between 7 thousandths and 10 thousandths of wood thickness needs to be removed from each side of the boards to produce finished surfaces free of any bandsaw blade marks. Here I'm showing a comparison of 5-inch wide putdook boards. The top board is before sanding, and the bottom board is after sanding with the board sander with 60 grit sandpaper. A total between 7 and 10 thousandths of an inch was sanded off each surface of the boards to remove the bandsaw blade marks. The board sander may not produce perfectly parallel sides on both edges of the board being sliced. To resolve this problem, pass the board through the board sander and then rotate the board 180 degrees and pass it through the sander at the same settings. This will compensate for any minor non-parallelism of the drum sander. Now what I usually do after every couple cuts is I clean out the slot on the rail. I did dust off the table to get rid of the excess sawdust, because what happens is sawdust can build up in this rail and it causes the bearings to get clogged up. In addition, you need to check and clean the roller bearings on the base of the carriage. Sawdust tends to pack into the surfaces of the polycarbonate sleeves on the roller bearings and should be wiped off regularly. If you start to feel some resistance as you're pushing your board through the bandsaw blade, or you start to feel a jerking motion, this is an indication that the roller bearings are dirty. The roller bearings can be cleaned by just wiping with a damp cloth or with a fine steel wool pad. Now in cutting those walnut boards, I did get some gumming up with the blade. This was a brand new blade when I started. It was 10 teeth per inch, and I cut about 12 cuts with this blade, and it is gumming up. Let me show you how I clean it up. I clean it up pretty easily. And what I'm doing, I have a rag here. I'm going to spray some WD-40 on it, and then just wipe the blade. Going down, pushing the blade. And that does clean it up. Well, you can see there how I cleaned it up. I prefer using this. I've tried wire brushes and stuff in the past, and they tend to dull the blade, so this would not dull the blade. For additional information and videos on the Accu-Slice system, please go to our website. And once again, thank you for watching this video. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please give us a call or drop us an email. We'd be glad to talk with you.